Hello, this is Anne McQueen, writer and advisor from McQueen Philanthropic. I'm speaking with you today on behalf of Animating Democracy, a program of Americans for the Arts. I'm working with Animating Democracy to create a series of papers and podcast interviews featuring the stories of grantmakers that support arts organizations and artists with the intention of affecting social change. The series hopes to inform, inspire, and activate funders and others to support arts and cultural activities as a creative strategy to achieve their mission, including their goals to advance social and economic justice and reform our education, health, or criminal justice systems. Joining me today is Deborah Fisher, Executive Director of A Blade of Grass, a public charity that supports socially engaged artists working in partnership with communities to create social change. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you, Anne. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great. So let's start, let's start at the beginning by talking about the launch of A Blade of Grass. How did you all arrive at the structure for a fellowship program focused on artists rather than nonprofits?
Well, we started, actually, A Blade of Grass really started as a series of conversations between Shelley Rubin, our founding chair of our board, and I. And she was wanting to learn more about contemporary art. She's she's a co-founder of the Rubin Museum of Himalayan Art, right? And she wanted to learn more about contemporary art. And we got into a really interesting series of discussions about the context that the art sits in. She had these great questions about how the economy of contemporary art works and why are all of the galleries in one place and why is the gallerist's name always named the gallery and how do artists get paid and, all of these really interesting questions about about the context in which it sits, and that's really not surprising. The ancient art has a tendency to be very much embedded in its culture, right? It's inseparable from the culture that it sits in. So I said, do you want to look at some different art? That's kind of doing work directly in the culture that it sits in. It's not separated, because that's what she was really pointing to. She was pointing to, why are the walls always white? Why is the architecture of the gallery always the same? Why does it feel suspended, And in doing that, we found a lot of alignment, right, with two different things, with a lot of different things, actually. The problems of socially engaged art are very interesting. There's no art object that everybody's rallying around. It's very process-based. It can be very difficult to see. Calling it art can sometimes be challenging in a very delightful way. It can be a real brain pickle. It was also really great for Shelley because it brought together a lot of her specific interests and wove them together into something very concrete, right? She's always been very supportive of the arts. And she's also been a board member of Human Rights Watch for many years. Social justice issues are very, very important to her. She's a huge supporter of Planned Parenthood and WNET. Those are all. It took a bunch of things that she was thinking a lot about, and she wanted to think about them all at the same time. She also really, really likes the idea of supporting individual artists, and that was something that we decided was important at the very beginning because of the need. There are very, very few opportunities for individual artists to get money directly. So what we did was we started with this learning process, right, so that we could figure out how to make the most relevant possible contribution to a wider discourse, We engaged in a survey. About 500 people took part in it who were artists so that we can learn some more information about artists' economic lives. And we learned, and we put together an advisory committee with lots and lots of people who've been thinking about social practice and art at the intersection of art and social change for many, many years, right? And with that committee, we put together an experimental grant to individual artists called Artist Files. And the purpose of Artist Files was really to kind of think about what kind of social practice we wanted to focus on, because there are a lot of different kinds of artists working with people, but what do we mean?
Mm-hmm.
What do we want to support? So we focused on 20 different artists who are all thinking about a wide variety of socially based work. And that gave my board an opportunity, and we also really kind of engaged them in a very direct dialogue about their own economic lives and their needs and what a grant means. And from that, we learned a lot about what engages my board, right, which
mm-hmm.
is work that is directly enacting social change, right, as opposed to an artistic service or something like that, and work that is very ambitious in scale. Right, so this ambition question became something that was very interesting to the board. This idea of working directly in communities, feels very politically important. Right, the difference between enacting social change and representing social change became something that was very interesting to people. And from that, we really created a very specific stake in what we're looking for. So the fellowship was really evolved out of that listening process.
That's interesting. I like the distinction between enacting and representing, because these artists are really directly engaged with the change process.
Right.
So you've had 2 rounds of applications now. Can you give us some examples of a couple of your fellows? Tell us about their projects. And also I'm interested, there's a fellowship grant, there's money, but A Blade of Grass also offers resources. What kind of resources?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so we've had, we just ended our second round of open calls, and it might be nice to kind of think about this macro down into an example or two, right? One of the things that we're really thinking about is that there are way too few resources for individual artists, right? And so we want to make sure that everything that we do, we have 8 fellowships this year, and 504 people applied, right? So we have a responsibility, really, to make sure that we're feeding a larger discourse and generating a lot more value than just helping 8 artists, right? So, so last year 510 people applied. This year 504 people applied, and so what we're really thinking about is gathering. So we have a great opportunity to continue that listening, kind of collecting information about the big picture kind of process, right? So, so we keep track of who's applying from where, and some information about what kinds of issue areas people are applying in and things like that, so that we can keep generating lots and lots of information about how the field of social practice looks, right, and how it works and operates. And we're doing that at a variety of levels, and everything that we do is kind of organized around this generating knowledge. Each fellowship has a $20,000 stipend paired with specific services. You get a documentation of your project from an external documentary crew who's done a lot of really great work. It's a 3 to 5 minute video documentary. There's also a 3-phase assessment process, that is that the artists that we're working with are finding particularly valuable. So they engage in self-assessment. We ask them to write about their project and what they're learning as they go. They also meet on a quarterly basis and learn action research techniques, right, both for their own self-reflection and to help one another, right? So we're actually modeled a lot like Creative Capital, but instead of programming workshops, what we do is we get the artists together so that they can help one another with their projects. And we do that by just giving enough structure using the collaborative action research exercises, to get a sense of what the big picture is and what these projects have in common and how people can help one another. In addition to that, we also hire Jan Cohen-Cruz, who's an amazing evaluator of this type of work, to do an independent ethnographic type assessment using the same kind of action research methodology. So what she'll do is she'll design and that is based on the artist's definition of success. So we ask artists to help design what Jan is evaluating. And she goes and she talks to a variety of stakeholders. She participates herself, when it's appropriate, and she is in dialogue in some of it's just watching, and some of it's asking very specific questions. And then the artist is asked to collect some specific metrics, right, that again help them tell their story of what success is for the project. And then all of that is put together into a 20-page ethnographic assessment, right, so that we can get a clear sense of what happened in the project in the eyes of various stakeholders who participated. We also do, we also have things like an annual publication that everybody's included in, right? And we do programs with projects, right? And then we have web content that's specifically designed to showcase projects. So that's what we offer. That's what a fellowship is. And
so tell us about a couple of fellows.
Yeah, definitely. So this year, our inaugural year, we have a couple of all of the projects are great, but Lori Jo Reynolds' project is particularly clear in terms of this enacting social change piece, right? Because she has been working for 10 years with a group of incarcerated families of people who are incarcerated in TAM's Supermax prison. And they've been working for 10 years on a project called TAM's Year 10 to close the prison. And they succeeded in that. And so what she applied with, and this is actually, it's also kind of an interesting challenge in social practice, right? So she applied with a project that was going to kind of leverage their fantastic success, right, at closing TAM's Year 10. And then, of course, reality being what it is, that success was very much dependent on a larger context, right? So she got very invested in the re-election of the governor of Illinois that she collaborated with to close the prison, right? And he lost. So she's in the process of renegotiating right now what she's actually doing for her fellowship. Because in
renegotiating with you,
with herself, well, with everybody. Like we're here to listen. We're not expecting her to get done exactly what she said she was going to do, as much as keep moving the ball forward on her project, right? And so what she's doing actually right now is figuring out what the best response is with her collaborators, and we're following that process. Yeah. So, and another great example, of work in context is Noreen Letty and Liz Slagus. They're working on a very wonderful project called Sex Ed, which basically uses art and art education to co-create sex education curriculum in the public schools in New York City. So they're working at Washington Irving High School with teenagers, and they're asking the teenagers to help them create curriculum and art projects that talk about all of the things that you're not supposed to talk about in a sex education class. So they talk about pleasure, consent, healthy relationships, gender issues, so like all of the things that are not the mechanics or how not to get pregnant, and it's amazing work in large part because it focuses a lot on creating really high quality collages and videos and paintings and things like that. Art becomes an outlet and a way to talk about things that you can't talk about.
This is interesting. It sounds like, you're very engaged with the artists, as they are engaged with their communities. It seems to mirror each other in a way. And sort of has something to do, I think, with the way A Blade of Grass is organized. Most of the organizations, actually all the other organizations I've profiled for Animating Democracy's Funder Portrait Series were foundations. A Blade of Grass isn't a foundation. Instead, it's incorporated as a public charity. And it sounds to me sort of like a cross between a community foundation and a service organization.
That's right.
Yeah. How does this? Why does it manifest?
Well, it's a good question, and it's confusing because we started when we were founded in 2011. We were a very, 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 very tiny private foundation with a $5 million endowment, And it very quickly became clear that that there was a lot of work to do. And so very quickly, still in by 2012, we were convinced that we really had to change direction. So technically, we're actually in an advanced ruling period. We're becoming a public charity. And what we do is, a lot of that was about board ambition, right? My board really started to kind of see what's possible, what the potential is, and how little, $250,000 or 5% of $5 million was going to get done. And the other thing that became very clear very quickly was that there was a real political imperative, to create a broad public base of support for this work, because it's work that engages the public directly, because it is work that, and also because it's work that directly affects power relationships. Having a broad base of power supporting it, because dollars are power, having a broad base of power to support it, felt like a way to ensure that we were always able to take great risks and always able to, really let the artists speak for themselves and do great work. Yeah.
And you're raising money as well.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we are actively fundraising. Yes.
And how does that work?
It's been going well. So what we do, we've been actively fundraising for about a year. What we're really kind of focusing on in our fundraising is that the fellowship is a value center for a few different constituencies. It's a great way to support individual artists. Supporting individual artists creates a lot of extra work for the IRS. We're set up to do that work, right? So that's simple. We also support artists that are doing very process-based work and invisible work in ways that make products come out, right? So the money that you are investing doesn't get lost. There's a sense of, there's an assessment. That's really helpful. Right? So there are a lot of people who want to focus on this work and focus on supporting it, but it's very difficult to see, and it's very difficult to account for, because it's happening very far away, and if you don't experience it, it can be very difficult to even know that it existed, right? And so what we're doing is we're investing in tools that close the loop, right, and make it clear what's being supported. Right? And that's very useful for people. And so we're thinking about going into some of the most interesting work that we've been doing with fundraising is really about going beyond arts organizations and into things like residency programs. Saying if you want to support an artist in residence in your context, in your municipality, for example, the fellowship is a great way to keep track of what, a great way to administer that. And we can do that for you. Or, we're working with David Rockefeller Fund on a grant that puts one of our does a criminal justice fellowship, right? So they have a criminal justice docket, and we would have a fellow that works in direct relationship to their criminal justice docket. So we're in the process of planning something like that. It's not, we're in the planning phase of that. So what we're thinking about is the way that these artists are moving out into the world and creating new relationships that are not necessarily art relationships, and thinking about ways to keep that momentum up and use it to grow support. The other thing that we're really thinking about is curriculum. We have a lot of data, and we're building 50 case studies of socially engaged art projects over the next 5 years that will provide a lot of really in-depth information about how social practice works. So we're really thinking about how to use that curriculum to help non-arts entities work better with artists, or help arts organizations work better with social practice artists, or help artists who want to make social practice work do more effective work.
So it sounds like you're also, you're building an audience, as you said, for this work, but it sounds like you're also bringing donors together and offering them service.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then how do you, to sort of close the loop, how do you evaluate the quality of this work, and how do you think about impacts? How do you talk to a donor about this? What do you learn from the work?
It's a great question. I mean, I think that one of the things that we really need to, the value that we can really add, or that art can really add to a philanthropy discussion, is it can talk a lot about qualitative quality, right? Like, so, the conversation in philanthropy is really data driven right now, and data can be very, very comforting, right? And one of the things about art is that it is neither comforting, nor is it, nor is it capable of being pinned down, right? And the way that works in terms of a larger field of trying to actually make social change, right? Like is interesting, because the more sure a philanthropist is of themselves, in saying, no, these nets will cure malaria, and then give this many nets, and then you can be sure that the nets will be used in very, very different ways by the individuals who receive the nets, right? They will be traded as currency, or they will be used to cover horses, or or whatever, right? Like, so there's something to the way that artists are working as creative change agents that is inspiring to philanthropists, right? Because they are also creative change makers. And then there's also a very specific lesson in the difference between assessing qualities and being qualitative about what is happening and meaning making, as opposed to relying on data, right? So what we do is we tell stories about what happened. We're thinking about this work ethnographically, and we are defining success in terms of artistic excellence, right? Is it a complex project? Does it really change the way that we think about things, right? Are its ideas elegant? And we're not necessarily asking artists to change the world for $20,000, right? Because that would be tremendously unfair, first of all, and it would be tremendously unfair, and it would also be kind of a scam, But what we are saying is that that's okay. We can tell a very clear story about exactly what's happening, and we can tell a story in which art gets to happen, right? And art is subjective. Art is complex and irreducible, right? Art enters into a conversation about uniqueness, right? And what we're saying is that conversation has a lot of value in the larger philanthropy landscape, and that what we can do about these projects, because they do have real social change goals, is be incredibly clear about exactly what the artists are doing, who is participating, how many people are participating, and what exactly their experiences are, and the kinds of qualities that are coming out, right? So what we're saying is not necessary. So what we're saying is that we can tell an incredibly clear set of specific stories about our projects, right? What we don't want to do is say that Jody Wood's project for example, which is about a homeless shelter, right? Like it's about homeless shelters, and what she does is she operates a mobile beauty salon that cuts hair and does hair outside of homeless shelters all over the city. So that project is a really great example of how tricky it is to even use the word impact and what we can do to change the dialogue about what impact means, right? Because just scaling that up, right? So what she's doing is she's giving 6 or 8 people a really amazing experience that explores their the agency that they lost when they entered the homeless shelter system, right? A social services agency would have to give everybody a haircut, right, in the shelter, right? So because she's operating as an artist, she can do very different things. And it's a very expensive proposition. So somebody could stay in the chair for 2.5 hours, having a very intense weave or very intricate braids, or getting their hair colored in a very labor-intensive way, right? And the point of the project is not necessarily to make sure that everybody gets taken care of, but it's to make sure that one individual gets an experience of agency, and that every other person that they contact inside the shelter service system sees that woman getting agency, having agency for a period of time, so that they can learn about the agency that gets lost when you enter the system, right? So what it does is it creates, so to scale it up or to treat the project as if it were a social service program, right, would be to completely miss the point, right? To say, like, we really need to just scale this up and make it so that everybody can get their hair done would be a tremendous waste of money, actually. Because the point is to have this intervention, right? It works more like acupuncture, so that you can see a problem, and then people talk about it, and then things start to change. So this work has to happen in relationship with other people who are doing different things to actually address the problems that Jody, in this example, is bringing to the surface, so that we can all talk about them. That's one of the reasons why we think that it's important to put this work into a larger social services kind of context, or philanthropy context, because the artists can't solve the problems. What they can do is they can create a dream space. They can give us an opportunity to look at the problem very differently. They can create a prototype or a model, right? But they can't necessarily increase X by 50%. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Thank you.
And I don't think it's a good use of art, actually, to do that. I think it's more interesting to enable creative thinking with art.
Yeah, they're sparking ideas, amongst their audience, amongst the social service agencies, amongst your donors, and the larger audience. That's great. Well, thank you. This is very interesting. I really appreciate your sharing the work of A Blade of Grass. Please go to the A Blade of Grass website to read more. They have lots of really interesting blogs and information on their website, and you'll see more lists of artists, obviously. You'll find more links about other funders that link the art with social change on the Animating Democracy website. This site also includes papers about evaluation, in-depth case studies on art-based civic engagement projects, an archive of webinars, and a directory of other organizations doing this work, and more. Thank you, Deborah, and